Hi, this is Dan Stafford, your host with Desert Spirit Chronicles, and I have with me a guest today, John Hindle, who has been out on some very interesting trips out in the Mojave Desert, which is what this show is focused on. And I'm going to introduce John a little bit. John's an accomplished author and a longtime friend and poet, which I know John from the poetry days. Um, the two of us wrote on poetry boards for years together, and both of us have had our own experiences out in the Mojave. And today is going to be about some of John's. So, on that note, John, I want to get some of your background. Where did you grow up?
I grew up mostly in Natchez, Mississippi, but I also spent time growing up in New Orleans, both those places. And I went to high school in Covington, Louisiana, a Catholic school there.
Okay. What did you do for work when you were younger?
My longest job was probably as a substitute teacher in the school system in Baton Rouge, where I live now.
Okay, cool. So, what got you into going out into trips across the Mojave?
Well, truthfully, first it was I read a lot of books by an author named Frank Waters, who is considered the Faulkner of the Southwest, and he wrote a lot about the Native American culture, the Hispanic cultures there, and also the Anglo people who live there. And his books were very spiritual and beautiful about the landscape and the people there, so it got me interested.
Okay. Now, if I recall correctly, you told me your wife was your traveling companion on these journeys. Is that correct?
Well, we weren't actually married at that time, but we did travel together at that time.
Okay.
We did a lot of traveling.
You want to tell us a little bit about your wife?
Well, she actually grew up in New York City in the Lower East Side in a housing project where her father and mother and her lived. She spent a lot of her time there. She was a dancer. She had a degree, in I think it was Brooklyn College in dance, modern dance, and that's what she did a lot back then.
Interesting.
I could tell you the story that kind of I think puts together a lot of what our experiences together were. Um, she went on a long walk once when she was a teenager. She told me about this. I wasn't there, and she walked all the way from the southern end of Manhattan to the northern end, the cloisters on the northern furthest north of Manhattan. During that walk, she said that she imagined living out in Nebraska in the wheat and cornfields and being more immersed in nature. So I think our trips together made that real for her, made it come true. Her
Okay, that's
dreams, I mean.
interesting. That's very interesting. So, she had a little bit of a traveling spirit as it was, you could say, I
She
think, from that.
she did. She actually did a little traveling before we met with her first husband. Her first big trip, she went from New York City. I think this may have been the first time she left it, all the way from New York City to to Hollywood, California, where she lived in a macrobiotic commune there for a while. And then her husband was from Louisiana, so he took her from there to a kung fu commune in Louisiana, and that's where I met her many years later.
Interesting. Interesting. So, I want to talk about a couple of different trips that you took for today. I know there's more than two that you've got stories about, but I want to focus on a couple of them. Um, I think there was one where you went to the Navajo reservation and the Hopi reservation. If I'm remembering right, those were both within the same trip.
They were actually the Navajo reservation surrounds the Hopi reservation. The Hopi is right in the middle of the Navajo. So we crossed in from the southern part of the Navajo all the way through the Hopi reservation to the other end, which was also Navajo.
Interesting, interesting. So tell us a little bit about when you're entering the reservation. I think you mentioned something about seeing hogans and sheep herders or something like that.
That's the first thing we saw when we entered the reservation. We saw a bunch of sheep. We actually didn't see the herder there, but we saw roaming some wild sheep out there in the desert. That was one of the first things we saw as we went into the reservation. And we did pass some hogans, which are kind of like little yurts, similar to yurts that the Navajo lived in, some of them still at that time.
Yeah, I've read a little bit about hogans. They have a real strong spiritual significance to the Navajo. I'm actually studying Navajo language on Duolingo. I've been at that for, I want to say I just hit 180 days of study, yeah, just a few minutes a day. But that's just a little bit of a side story. I want to get back to this. So, you were talking about a gas station out in the desert?
Yeah, we had limited money at that time. We were just traveling, and I had a shell card, a gas card. We stopped at this little gas station in the middle of the desert, in the middle of nowhere, and I had no idea if the card would work, but it did. And it was a shell station in the middle of the desert, run by a Hopi Indian out there. Um, so he talked to us, and he was real interested where we were from, Louisiana. And amazingly, he knew about Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer, Mark Twain's books, and talked to us about it. So it was kind of an interesting experience, and I think he checked out our car for us to make sure it was in good condition before we went on.
Nice, nice. So that will surprise you a little bit that he knew about those books. In a way, I'm not surprised. Those books have been here for a long time, and they've had a lot of wide exposure. You know, but one of the things I forgot to ask about, around what year was this trip?
It was we made two trips out that way, but this was, I believe, in 1996 when we went there.
96. Okay, yeah. So definitely barely into the internet age. I mean, the internet was probably just a baby in the cradle at that point, in the dial-up
Yeah,
cradle at that.
and
Yeah,
actually at that point, I didn't even really have internet connection. It was there, but I didn't have it.
yeah. I got my first internet that year. The first
Yeah,
internet
me
ever.
too.
Yeah.
I did too later on.
Okay. So, you mentioned something about driving along the ridge of the Hopi Reservation,
The
and
first, I should say, the first stop we made in the Hopi Reservation was at a place called Walpi, which was a Pueblo.
okay. And what did you do there? Did you get out and explore, or did you have
We
tours?
did. The first encounter we had with people at that place was below the Walpi was way up high on a mesa, real high up, hundreds of feet up on a mesa. It was an ancient Hopi city that was occupied up on the mesa still. But the first experience we had there, we were at a gas station below it. I wasn't sure how to get up there. So we talked to some guys who were out there sitting out in front of the gas station. And one of them offered to go up there with us. And we had thought that was a good idea. But then I realized we had camping equipment in the back seat and there wouldn't be any room for him. So we went on up there by ourselves.
Interesting, interesting. And so, uh, did you end up doing a tour of Walpi?
Well, we did. What the first step? We went to this building. There were sandstorms going on at this time, high winds and stuff. So we went to this big building, and it was a huge like room out there. We were all sitting on the ground, and there was an elderly Hopi man sitting at the end of the room, and he was the man who organized the tours. and he was kind of gazing off, kind of in a dream almost. It was very interesting. Kind of reminded me of a shaman or somebody like that. And we just sat there and waited for a tour.
Interesting, interesting. So another thing that you mentioned to me in the past was something about a small bent up sign for old Orabi.
Older Robbie, I found out about that reading Frank Waters' books, and that's what I was looking for on the trip. Older Robbie is along with another place we went to called Acoma. They're both considered the oldest continuously inhabited communities in the United States. It goes back 1,000 years. So I was just looking, I was driving down this gravel road in the Hopi Reservation, looking around, hoping to find it. And we came across, I just happened to notice it. I could have easily passed it by, but there was a little bent up street sign saying Old Arabi. So we pulled off there and we went out there, and there was this big jewelry shop, fancy jewelry shop there in the middle of nowhere. We went in there. There was a man in a nice suit, and we asked him if we could go up and see Old Arabi. He told us that we could go as far as the wall of the city. We did. There was sand blowing everywhere, wind, and we had to kind of walk against the wind.
Okay, that's one of the other things that you mentioned about this trip was the dust storms or sandstorms. Um, how much were the sandstorms a feature of this trip?
They were a big feature. In fact, we experienced a lot of wind all the way through New Mexico into Arizona. I think when we got to the Grand Canyon, it had slacked off because we were hiking there and it wasn't so bad.
Interesting, interesting. Sounds like Thunderbird was flapping his wings.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So you talked about something about a city of old apartments that were showing their age. Where was that?
That was Old Arabi.
Okay.
That was that. Yeah, we saw that. That's what we saw there. It was according to what I've read by Frank Waters, the city has kind of, it's kind of run down apartments, but it is it is the spiritual center of the Hopi civilization, an ancient center for their civilization. And people, they don't allow, I don't believe, non-Hopi people to go into the city. We saw it through the wall, but they have a rule about people going in there, not non-Hopis.
I can understand. I mean, if that's the heart of the Hopi culture, they're kind of want to going to preserve things as they are, preserve the history. That's, something that a lot of cultures try to do. Here in the U.S., European descended culture, like North American USA culture, we tend to prioritize the new, but we do have a sense of history too in our own way, but I don't think it's quite as strong as the Native American cultures have with theirs, maybe because they've lost so much of it over time. Yeah, but
That's very true.
yeah,
That's very true.
yeah.
It was still an interesting experience because we did get to see it, and it was kind of like a dream come true for me because I'd read about it, and I didn't even know if we found it.
Interesting. Well, good on you that you did. That's pretty cool because I didn't even know about this until you told me, actually. All right. So, you mentioned something about descending a ridge and there's sand clouds blowing across the desert far below the mountain, something like that.
That was when we were kind of leaving the Hopi reservation. We had been traveling along this mountain ridge along into the reservation, and we were coming down out of the mountains into this broad, flat desert area. And as you look below us, there were these big orange clouds of dust blowing across the road. So that's our first, what we saw as we were coming out of the reservation.
On the way out. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But
So,
before that, there were a couple of things people might be interested in where we ate at in the reservation.
yeah, go ahead and talk about that. I'd like to hear about it. Excuse me.
Okay, the first place we stopped along the road, and it was a little prefab restaurant built out of prefab building where people actually ate there who were Hopis, people who lived there. And as we were eating, I overheard this conversation between a woman and a man. She was trying to get him to kind of come out of his shell and talk. So she was talking about the food she liked, hamburgers, hot dogs, and stuff. And the man was kind of quiet and shy, but she actually did kind of get him to talk some. So that was our first dining experience there. The second one was at this place called the Hopi Cultural Center, which was kind of like a museum with a restaurant, very fancy, like a five-star restaurant in the middle of the reservation. They had people in suits and fancy clothes serving us. We ate lamb and all kind of other foods there. It was really nice, and they had pictures from the Hopi history, pictures that were taken in the 19th century.
Interesting, interesting. So a little contrast of the regular everyday life of the Hopis and the more touristy, attraction type thing.
Exactly. That's exactly what it was. That's right.
Yeah, yeah, it sounds like it. I wouldn't mind having a hot dog in that place sometime. Just say, yeah, that or a burger. Yeah, it
I
sounds
think
fun.
of the two experiences, I liked especially the one where we ate with the actual people who lived there. That was kind of nice.
Yeah, yeah, share a little bit of their daily life. Yeah, that
Yeah.
sounds good. Sounds like a good thing. Okay, was there anything else about the Hopi Reservation that you'd want to point out before I kind of shift the focus over to what happened on the Navajo Reservation while you were there?
Um, I think that kind of covers the Hopi Reservation a lot from what I can remember.
Okay, okay. So what are some of the highlights about the Navajo Reservation? You said there was something about a dinosaur tracks park.
That was the highlight for us. There was still dust storm blowing all over the place, but we saw this thing that said sign that said dinosaur tracks. So we pulled off the road, and there was a young Hopi, I mean not Hopi, but Navajo lady, um, giving tours of the dinosaur track. So we got out of the car and she led us around. There was still sand blowing everywhere. The sky was kind of covered with sand. So she couldn't speak English. I guess she mainly spoke Navajo, but she did point out the tracks to us as we were walking by, and they had them labeled Brontosaurus, T Rex, and so forth and so on. And it was an amazing thing because you could see the tracks of all these dinosaurs embedded in the rock on the ground. And it was quite fascinating to see that. I've never seen something like that before. And so we walked around out there, and she would smile and point at the tracks, and we had a nice time. And then after that, she had a bunch of her jewelry and stuff that she was selling out there on a table. So we got these pine nut necklaces for ourselves. And as we were pulling away from the place to head toward the Grand Canyon, I could see in the rearview mirror that she was smiling and waving. And I guess she had a nice experience because she might get lonely out there by herself.
Yeah, yeah. I imagine so. Out in the desert, there's probably not an awful lot of visitors, so it must be kind of an interesting thing when someone does stop by.
I think that's what it was. It seemed like that. She really enjoyed. She was smiling while she was showing us the tracks, everything. She was really enjoying the socialization, I think.
Okay, so you mentioned a couple of times to me about driving along a ridge while the sandstorm was going on out there. Was that on the Hopi Reservation or the Navajo Reservation?
It was on both actually. Well, we experienced it a lot when we were driving on that ridge through the Hopi Reservation, and then when we got down to the dinosaur tracks, it was really blowing a lot. Where you could see it, we saw first from the height of the mountain, where you could see the orange clouds blowing across the highway, and then we got actually down there. And when we were descending from the mountain, I was wondering how it'd be like to drive through that stuff, but we did okay. We got through there and we made it to the Grand Canyon.
Nice. So there was something you were telling me about, um, that you went to Point for the sunset.
That was at the Grand Canyon,
Oh,
and
okay.
I got a wonderful picture of my wife there at sunset, and I also took a series of pictures of the canyon as the sun was going down and the colors were changing. It was a nice experience. That's where we went.
Would you be willing at some point to send me some copies of those pictures so that I could add them to the post about this once I publish this?
Sure, I'd be glad to. I'd be glad to.
Okay, yeah, yeah. It doesn't have to be a ton, but a few of the ones that you think are the real, the
Now,
real kickers.
I can tell you though, when we were on the reservation, I think they really didn't want you to take pictures of the historical sites. I don't know. I guess they were sacred to them, so that we really,
Yeah,
like Walpi and Old Araba, I wouldn't get pictures there.
yeah. No. I understand that. Yeah, I completely understand that. There's a lot of cultures that have a thing about taking pictures, but just a couple of pictures that capture the essence of you and your wife traveling together through the reservation, would be more what I'm looking for to add to the post. Yeah.
Well, we do have pictures of us on the Grand Canyon. I don't think we have really any in the reservation, but
Okay. That's fine. That's fine. Okay. So you were talking to me about a hotel along the rim of the Grand Canyon.
oh wait, now that was in Tuba City in the Navajo reservation. Um, we were going through there. It was getting toward night. We wanted to stop and sleep, so we stopped on the sidewalk at Tuba City and asked some guy if where he knew about a hotel. We were thinking just something like a Motel 6 or a little, small, modest hotel. And he directed us to one. We got there. We paid for our room, and when we walked in that room, it was like a huge, almost fancy hotel. It was unbelievable. We had it was like the size of the room was about the size of the apartment I'm living in now. It was it was incredible. It was everything was just really fancy. I mean, it was like a European hotel in the middle of the desert.
Well, it sounds like the Great Spirit was looking out for you that night.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
nice,
right.
nice. Um, didn't you say there were like rabbits and deer running around all over the place at one point?
That was when we were after the sun went down to the Grand Canyon. We were driving back out of the canyon toward Williams, where we were going to stay. And as we were in a long line of traffic, it was backed up for miles. But there were rabbits and deer out, and you could see them in the headlights all around out in the forest there. We were driving, I think it was some kind of national forest that was on the south side of the canyon, and we saw all that. Yeah.
Interesting, interesting. So now, at some point, there was a movie of the Grand Canyon and watching Cortez bow upon seeing the canyon for the first time. What?
It was an IMAX movie outside of, I think it was part of the national park, but it was an IMAX movie we stopped to watch. And the most inspiring part of the movie was we saw Cortez approach the canyon, and that was the first time a European had seen it. And so we saw him bow down in front of the canyon and do the sign of the cross, and it was quite inspiring. We had already seen the canyon, but seeing that historical background made it even more moving.
Okay. Somewhere along the way, wasn't there someone selling pottery that you told me
Oh well,
about?
that's kind of rewinding some. When we went to Walpi, the one I originally told you about when we first got to the Hopi reservation. When we were on the tour, they led us across the Pueblo, and at the end, they brought us into a room, and there was a lady, a young Hopi lady, selling her pottery, and the room was interesting. It looked like it was out of the 19th century. There was a coal stove in the middle of the room, and the young lady was selling her pottery. She looked kind of uncomfortable a little bit, kind of, a little bit antsy, because I guess, she was selling her art, and it was going to go into somebody else's room. Plus, she may have had a little stage fright, I guess, not used to being in front of a large group selling her stuff as much, or hadn't gotten used to it. So it was an interesting experience. I don't recall if we bought any, but we were there. It was interesting.
That's what I was going to ask, if you still had any of it by any chance. That would have
You
been
know,
interesting.
I don't right now. I think I misplaced it on some of our moves, but I used to. I did have some, but not from Hopi, from Acoma, another place.
Okay, okay. So, one last thing about the Hopi reservation. You said something about a bunch of Hopi men sitting in front of a gas station?
That's what I talked about earlier at Walpi. When we were about to go up on top of it, there were some men there, and one of them offered to take us on a tour of the Pueblo, but we didn't have room in the back seat
Right.
because of the camping.
Okay. All right. So that was at that point. I wasn't sure if that was tied together or not. Okay.
That was the first place we stopped on the Hopi reservation.
Interesting. Interesting. What about you said you were walking past a park where some children were playing basketball, or where they did play basketball?
Well, it was a place we didn't actually see them playing, but we did see the hoop, and it was up. We saw the park. It was on Walpi. It was part of the Pueblo where the children could play.
Interesting. Interesting. So some things
Now,
some things are cross-cultural, it sounds like.
yeah. Now, Walpi is a very ancient Pueblo. It was probably one of the most impressive things we saw in the Hopi reservation, aside from Old Arabi.
Interesting. Interesting. So, what about the Grand Canyon? Anything more? There was something about a Bright Angel Trail.
Well, the Bright Angel Trail is one of the big trails that leads down to the bottom of the canyon on the south rim of the canyon. So we hiked down about 1,000 feet, which is about a fifth of the way down to the bottom. We didn't have time to go all the way down and then back up. Plus, it was a very strenuous hike coming back up. So we went to the first rest station down there in the canyon, and we had to hike all the way back up. So that was a hard hike, but we enjoyed it. We had a good time.
Sounds like that would give you a really good sense of the scale of the canyon itself.
Oh yeah, it was great because I took pictures down from below the rim, which you couldn't get from up on the rim, with a perspective that was very different from on top.
Okay. So, if somebody wanted to go visit that Bright Angel Trail, what state was that in?
It's in Arizona, within the southern part of the canyon in Arizona.
Okay. Interesting. Hey, is it near one of the interstate highways somewhere?
Well, I think the closest interstate highway would be the one that goes to Flagstaff and Williams.
That sounds
Now,
like Interstate 10.
yeah, but no, I think 10 is south. 10 goes through Phoenix and Tucson down there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I
you're
forget.
right. No, it must be Interstate 40 then.
It is. It's Interstate 40. You're right. It
Yeah,
is.
okay. Yeah, my experiences out in the Mojave have been mostly in Southern California along Interstate 40 and along Interstate 10, and
Yeah.
in that area between the two. A little bit up to Interstate 15 as well. So it definitely, like Baker, um, Goffs and Essex, Amboy, Joshua Tree, Wonder Valley, 29 Palms. That's the kind of area I used to work in 2023 for pretty much the whole year.
Yeah.
Um,
I went through some of those areas with my sister on another trip where we went across the Mojave. I didn't go actually into the Mojave with my wife, but I did cross it with my sister.
Interesting. Is there anything else about that particular trip that you would say stood out to you or you would want to talk about?
Well, another Pueblo, I mentioned that there was another one that about the same age as older Robbie. It was called Acoma in New Mexico. And that was one of the most interesting places we actually traveled to out there. It's an ancient Pueblo. It goes back, it was built 1,000 years ago. It's on top of a 400-foot mesa. And we
Interesting.
had some interesting experiences there.
Anything you want to tell us about?
Oh, sure. Yeah, they're one of the most interesting. First, we took a tour of the Pueblo. They have a road that was only built, I think, in the 50s, back when they were making a movie, to get up on top of the mesa. The only other way to go down is on the trail, the ancient trail that they used to travel going back and forth. So first, we took a tour of Acoma. Um, I've actually been there twice, once with my sister and once with my wife. We took tours of it and saw a lot of interesting ancient buildings. We saw what was considered one of the oldest translucent material window there that was built before, they had windows in a lot of the other world. It actually, you couldn't see through it, but it did transmit light onto the inside of the building. It was made of a mineral called mica, I believe, is what I remember.
Kind of almost like
And
a frosted glass skylight in a way, it sounds like.
exactly, it was very similar. We saw that, and they pointed that out to us that it was one of the oldest kind of windows built. Um, and then they gave us a choice after the tour. We could either take the bus down off the mesa or climb the trail that was there that the ancient people used. So we decided to go down the trail instead of taking the bus. So the climb was quite scenic. Being on top of it was scenic, but the climb was also. And on the way down on the climb, there was a little kitten that went along with us. I don't know who owned it or whatever, but it followed us all the way from the top to the bottom. Um, so I imagine in one of my stories that it was like a nagual, which is a Native American term for a person who can change into an animal form and back and forth. It's a myth. So I kind of wrote that as an interesting story for one of my poems.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, it's amazing how some of those small things like that can have a more inner significance for us, especially in an environment. There, it seems like anything that happens that's animated like that, like dust devils or animals and creatures that you find out in the Mojave, because it's so vast and quiet. There's not much but wind out there, and because it's so sparse, it's not dead. It's not that. Not even close. That doesn't describe it at all. But there's so much room and space out there that anything like that seems to me to get magnified somehow.
It did. It definitely did for us. In fact, we also petted the cat as we were going down and had that kind of encounter. It was nice. It was very interesting.
Interesting. Okay. Anything else you'd want to say about this trip?
I'm trying to think. There was something else, and I can't quite recall offhand. But that's well. We also went to a place called Crater National Park or something in Arizona.
Meteor
And
crater, probably.
Meteor Crater, that's it. We went there and we got some pictures there. It was quite an interesting place. Where an ancient meteor. It's quite one of the few places you see an actual crater made by meteor because most of the Earth is so rainy and the soil gets smoothed down. But out there in the desert in Arizona, you could still see this big crater.
I think that's featured in the 1980s movie Starman with Jeff Bridges, if I recall correctly.
It might be. I haven't seen that movie, but it sounds like it could be.
Yeah, that's a pretty good one and a classic. You might want to sometime. Just saying. Yeah, but yeah, I think a meteor crater is the one that they had featured in Starman, and so
It does sound like something I'd like to see, definitely.
oh yeah, yeah, it's definitely got a lot to it. It's very interesting. It's got kind of a little bit of a spiritual feel to it. It's such a classic film. Um, I mean, anyone in our age group that hasn't seen it, I would recommend you see it.
Definitely. Yeah, I'll have to
Definitely.
check it out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And just going to mention, as we were leaving New Mexico on the way out, we stopped at a Native American cultural center in Albuquerque. And this isn't really the biggest event, but they gave me a bow and arrow, and I got to lead the dance there. It was kind of nice.
That sounds fun. That sounds fun.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun.
Yeah. All right, cool. So, I think we're about ready to wrap up on this one. We'll have to talk about some of your other adventures on another video, but
Yeah.
um, I'd like to ask a little bit about your books. Now, I know you got an author page on lulu.com. I'll end up putting links to that, the link to that in show notes and on the blog site. And um, I want to ask about what type of books. What would you say the themes are? Do you like do works of fiction? Do poetry? Do both? Um,
Actually, I do both, but a lot of my fiction is loosely based on real life, but a lot of it is fictional. I've definitely, I don't actually memorize all the conversations I've had and all, but it is the events, and a lot of the stuff going on is based on my life, and a lot of it's set out west, but also a lot in New Orleans where I grew up, and Natchez is also where I grew up.
Interesting, interesting. Okay, so on that note, we're gonna wind it up here. Thank you for being with us, John. I really appreciate it. Hope you had a good Thanksgiving.
Oh, I did. Thank you.
Yeah. And all of you watching out there, hope you had a great Thanksgiving. This is Dan Stafford, your host at Desert Spirit Chronicles. If you like this video and like this type of content, please like and subscribe. I'm going to want to have this channel focus on the people who go out and explore the desert, as I've mentioned before, more than just going out and exploring the desert myself. So I'm going to be interested in finding the characters that make up the spirit of exploring the Mojave Desert and the American Southwest. So on that note, thanks again, John, and we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.